The first time I realized my husband was cheating, our daughter was asleep upstairs, the nanny was in the kitchen, and my husband thought I was still at work. What he didn't know was that I had come home early, and what I heard that afternoon changed everything. But I didn't confront him. I didn't scream. I didn't fire the nanny. Instead, I waited. Because if there's one thing my husband cared about more than anything in the world, it was his parents' opinion of him, and I knew something he didn't. They were about to find out the truth. My name is Rachel. 5 years ago, I believed I had the kind of marriage people admired. My husband Daniel was successful, respected, the responsible one in his family, the son who had done everything right. Good career, beautiful house, perfect wife, a daughter who had just turned 3. From the outside, our life looked like a magazine cover, and Daniel loved that image, loved being seen as the dependable one, the good husband, the good father, the one his parents bragged about to their friends, which is why what happened next was going to destroy him. The nanny came into our lives when our daughter Lily turned 2. Her name was Emma, 23, quiet, responsible. At least that's what we thought. She had excellent references, experience with toddlers, and she seemed genuinely kind to Lily. Within weeks, Lily adored her, and honestly, so did I. Emma made our lives easier. She handled daycare pickups, prepared snacks, played with Lily in the afternoons while Daniel and I finished work. She became part of the house, part of the routine, part of our life. And that was exactly why it worked. Because affairs rarely begin with dramatic moments. They begin with proximity, with convenience, with opportunity. And Emma had all 3. The first sign something was wrong was a text message, but not the kind you're expecting. One night, Daniel left his phone on the kitchen counter while he went upstairs to shower. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't suspicious. I was just cleaning up dinner. Then the phone buzzed. A message appeared on the screen. From Emma. She's going to be home soon. For a moment, I assumed it was about Lily. Maybe a scheduling question. Maybe something normal. But the second message appeared before I could even finish that thought. You should go upstairs before she gets here. My hands went cold. I stared at the phone, waiting for my brain to catch up with what my eyes had just read. Then the screen lit up again. Daniel replied, "Relax. She's still at work." Except I wasn't. I was standing in the kitchen, 10 feet away from his phone. The shower upstairs turned off. Water stopped running, which meant Daniel would be downstairs in less than a minute. I had 2 choices: confront him immediately, or pretend I never saw the messages. And in that moment, I made the same decision I would make again and again over the next few weeks. I stayed silent. Daniel came downstairs a minute later, towel over his shoulder, smiling like nothing in the world had changed. "Hey," he said casually, "you're home early." I forced a small smile. "Finished work faster than expected." He walked past me, picked up his phone, checked the screen. For a split second, I saw it, the tiny flicker of panic in his eyes. Then it disappeared. "Everything okay?" I asked. Daniel smiled again. "Yeah, just work stuff." Of course. But the strange part wasn't the messages. Not really. The strange part was Emma, because when I looked toward the living room, she was sitting on the floor playing with Lily, completely calm, completely comfortable, like nothing unusual had happened, which meant something terrifying. This wasn't the first time. That night, after Lily went to sleep, I opened my laptop, and for the first time in our entire marriage, I started looking for answers. Because if Daniel thought he could hide an affair in his own house, he had clearly underestimated something. Me. And if he believed the nanny was the safest person to cheat with, he had made a very dangerous mistake. Because Daniel cared about many things: his job, his reputation, his image. But the one thing he feared more than anything else was disappointing his parents. And by the time they found out what their perfect son had been doing in our house, it would already be too late for him to fix it. Once you suspect something, your entire house feels different. The same rooms, the same furniture, the same routines. But suddenly, everything looks unfamiliar. For the first 2 days after seeing those messages, I said nothing. I watched. I listened. I paid attention to things I had never noticed before. And slowly, patterns began to appear. Emma always arrived at the house at 8:30 in the morning. Daniel usually left for work around 8:45, or at least, that's what I thought. But on Wednesday, something strange happened. I left the house at my usual time, 8:15, drove 2 blocks away, then parked and waited. At 8:30, Emma arrived, just like always. At 8:45, Daniel walked out the front door, car keys in hand, coffee mug, the same routine I had seen hundreds of times before, except he didn't get in his car. Instead, he walked back inside the house. 10 minutes passed, then 15, then 20. Daniel never came back out. So I drove around the block again, parked where I could see the front door, and waited another half hour. Nothing, which meant something very simple. Daniel hadn't gone to work. He had stayed home with the nanny. My stomach twisted slightly, but the emotion I felt wasn't exactly anger. Not yet. It was clarity. Because once you see the pattern, everything else begins to make sense. Daniel's late meetings. Emma occasionally staying a little longer in the evenings. The way Daniel always seemed relaxed on the days Emma worked. By the time I drove to my office that morning, I already knew the truth. But knowing something and proving it are two very different things. So the following week, I changed my schedule. I started coming home early, unexpectedly, random times, and each time, I watched carefully. The second piece of evidence appeared on Thursday afternoon. I walked into the house quietly. Emma was in the kitchen. Daniel was standing very close to her, closer than necessary. When they saw me, they jumped apart. Too quickly, too obviously. Emma grabbed a dish towel, pretending to wipe the counter. Daniel smiled awkwardly. "You're home early," he said, the same line he had used before. "Yes," I replied. "Meeting ended sooner than expected." Emma wouldn't look at me, which told me everything I needed to know, because people who have done nothing wrong don't avoid eye contact. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat in the living room with my laptop and started planning. Not revenge, not yet, strategy. Because confronting Daniel immediately would only do one thing: make him careful. He would deny everything, fire the nanny, delete the messages, and suddenly, the entire situation would become my word against his. But if I waited, Daniel would keep making mistakes. And people in secret relationships always make mistakes. The third piece of evidence arrived 3 days later. I was upstairs folding laundry when I heard voices in the kitchen. Daniel had come home early. Emma was still there. They didn't realize I was in the house. "I can't keep doing this forever," Emma said quietly. My heart started beating faster. Daniel's voice came next, soft, reassuring. "It won't be forever. What about Rachel?" A pause. Then Daniel sighed. "We'll figure that out." "Figure that out." Emma sounded uncertain. "You said that last month." "I know, but things are complicated right now." "Because of Lily?" Emma asked. "Yes." Another pause. Then Daniel said something that made my hands tighten around the laundry basket. "I just need a little more time." The conversation ended when Lily started crying upstairs. Emma rushed to the stairs. Daniel followed, and neither of them realized I had heard everything. That night, I understood something important. Daniel wasn't just having an affair. Emma believed the relationship was real. She believed Daniel would eventually leave me, which meant something very predictable. Sooner or later, she would expect him to prove it. And when that moment arrived, Daniel would panic, which was exactly the moment I wanted, because I had already decided how this story would end. Daniel cared deeply about one thing, more than his job, more than his reputation, more than even his marriage. His parents, they adored him. Their successful son, the responsible father, the perfect husband. They believed Daniel was the most dependable person in the family, and that illusion was about to shatter. Because by the time they discovered what their son had been doing with our nanny, I would already have the proof. Once you stop reacting emotionally, you start thinking clearly. And once you start thinking clearly, you realize something important. Revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes, the most effective revenge is simply letting the truth appear in front of the right people. And in Daniel's case, there were two very specific people who needed to see it. His parents. Daniel adored them, but more importantly, he feared disappointing them. His father, Richard, had built a successful construction company from nothing. Hard-working, disciplined, extremely traditional. His mother, Linda, was even more intense. Family values, loyalty, reputation. She believed Daniel had the perfect life, a stable marriage, a beautiful daughter, a responsible career. If she ever discovered he had been sleeping with our nanny inside our house, while our daughter was upstairs, it wouldn't just embarrass him. It would destroy the image he had spent his entire life building. So instead of confronting Daniel, I made a phone call. "Hi, Linda," I said cheerfully. "We haven't had a family dinner in a while." She sounded delighted. "Oh, Rachel, that would be wonderful. How about Sunday evening?" Perfect. Sunday was Emma's normal work day. She stayed late to help with Lily's bath and dinner, which meant she would be in the house. And if things went exactly the way I expected, Daniel would assume nothing unusual was happening. The next step was simpler: evidence. Over the next week, I started documenting everything. Text messages, voice recordings, photos. Nothing dramatic, just small moments, small pieces of truth. Daniel touching Emma's arm in the kitchen, Emma lingering too close when they talked, the way they both froze whenever I entered the room unexpectedly. The most useful evidence came on Thursday night. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch. His phone slipped from his hand onto the floor. The screen lit up when it hit the carpet. Emma's name appeared. "Sunday night?" Daniel replied a moment later, half asleep. "After Lily goes to bed." Emma responded instantly. "Your wife won't notice." Daniel's answer made my decision feel even more justified. She never notices anything. I stared at the message for a long moment, then quietly placed the phone back beside him. Sunday evening arrived quickly. At 5 o'clock, Emma arrived as usual. At 6, Daniel came home from work, kissed Lily, poured himself a drink, everything normal. At 6:30, his parents arrived. Linda hugged me tightly. Richard carried a bag of groceries. Family dinner, exactly the kind of evening Daniel believed was safe, predictable, comfortable. Emma looked slightly surprised to see them, but Daniel didn't seem worried. Not yet. Dinner went smoothly. Conversation flowed easily. Work stories, family updates, Lily proudly showing her grandparents her toys. Daniel relaxed, the way people do when they believe everything is under control. After dinner, Linda offered to help clean the kitchen. Richard sat in the living room with Lily. Daniel poured himself another drink. Emma started preparing Lily's bath upstairs, just like every other evening, and right on schedule. Daniel checked the time. "Excuse me," he said casually. "I need to grab something from upstairs." Linda smiled. "Of course." He walked toward the staircase, relaxed, unaware. But this time, he wasn't going upstairs alone, because as he disappeared around the corner, Linda looked at me. "Rachel," she said softly, "can you help me with the dishes?" I smiled. "Of course." Then I waited exactly 20 seconds, just enough time. And then I said something that changed the entire evening. "Oh, Linda," I said lightly, "I think Daniel might need help with Lily upstairs." Linda nodded immediately. "Of course." And before Daniel had any idea what was happening, his mother walked toward the staircase, right as the bathroom door upstairs quietly closed. The sound of Linda's footsteps on the staircase was quiet, but to me, it felt incredibly loud, because I knew exactly what was about to happen upstairs. In the kitchen, I continued drying plates slowly, calmly, like nothing unusual was happening. Richard was still in the living room with Lily. Daniel believed the evening was completely normal, but upstairs, everything was about to change. Linda reached the hallway. She later told me exactly what she heard: soft voices, low laughter, and the sound of the bathroom door closing. At first she assumed Emma was bathing Lily. That was the routine. But something about the voices sounded wrong, too quiet, too careful. So she knocked lightly. "Emma?" she called. Inside the bathroom, everything went silent, completely silent, which is the worst possible reaction when someone knocks on a door, because silence confirms suspicion. Linda knocked again. "Daniel," she said this time. More silence. And then she opened the door. The bathroom light spilled into the hallway, and in that moment, the perfect image of Daniel's life shattered. Emma was standing near the sink, her shirt slightly unbuttoned. Daniel was standing much closer than any employer should ever stand to a nanny. Neither of them expected the door to open. Neither of them expected the person standing there to be Daniel's mother. For a moment, no one moved. Linda just stared at them, trying to understand what she was seeing, trying to convince herself she had misunderstood. But some situations are impossible to misunderstand. "Daniel," she said slowly, his face drained of color. "Mom." Emma stepped back immediately, her hands shaking. This isn't..." But she didn't finish the sentence because there was no explanation that could possibly work. Linda's voice became very quiet. "What are you doing?" Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "It's not what it looks like." That line. The oldest lie in the world. Linda stared at him for a long moment, then said something that cut straight through the lie, then explained what it looks like. Daniel couldn't, because downstairs, Richard had heard the raised voices. He walked toward the staircase. "What's going on?" he called. Daniel looked toward the hallway, toward the sound of his father's footsteps, and in that moment, he realized something terrifying. There was no escape from this. Richard reached the top of the stairs, looked past Linda, and saw everything. His expression hardened instantly. "You've got to be kidding me!" Daniel stepped forward quickly. "Dad..." "Don't." Richard rarely raised his voice, which made the word feel even heavier. Emma grabbed her jacket, her face pale, embarrassed, humiliated. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. No one stopped her. She rushed down the stairs, out the front door, and disappeared into the night, leaving Daniel standing in the hallway, alone with his parents. Linda looked at him like she didn't recognize him. "You did this in your own house?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer. "With your daughter here?" Still silence. Richard shook his head slowly. "I didn't raise you like this." Downstairs, I heard every word, and for the first time that evening, I walked toward the staircase because the moment had finally arrived. Daniel looked down when he heard my footsteps, and the look on his face said everything. He had just realized something. I hadn't accidentally invited his parents to dinner. I had arranged it. When I reached the top of the stairs, everyone was silent. Daniel stood in the hallway, his mother on one side, his father on the other. And the look on his face changed the moment he saw me, because suddenly he understood something. This wasn't an accident. "How long?" he asked quietly. Not what happened. Not did you see? Just one question. How long? I leaned against the staircase railing. Since the first message, Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly, the realization hitting him all at once. "You knew," he said. "Yes." "And you said nothing." "Yes?" Daniel laughed softly, but there was no humor in the sound, just disbelief. "You let this happen." "No," I replied calmly. "You did." Linda turned slowly toward me. "Rachel, you knew about this?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Almost 3 weeks." Linda closed her eyes for a moment, taking a slow breath, trying to process the situation. "You should have told us," she said quietly. "I wanted you to see it yourself." Richard nodded slowly, and for the first time since the discovery, he looked directly at his son. That was probably the right choice. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, clearly trying to find some way out of the situation. "This isn't what it looks like," he said again. Richard shook his head immediately. "Stop. Dad, no." His voice was firm, controlled, the way it always was when he was truly disappointed. "I saw enough." Linda looked at Daniel with tears in her eyes, not angry, not shouting, just deeply disappointed. "Your daughter was downstairs," she said quietly. Daniel didn't respond. "You brought that girl into this house." Still silence. "And you did it while Rachel trusted you." Daniel looked at the floor because there was nothing he could say that would make the situation better. After a moment, Richard spoke again. "Does this girl still work here?" "No," I said. "She doesn't anymore." Daniel looked up quickly. "You fired her?" "Yes." "When?" "About 5 minutes ago." Linda nodded slightly. "Good." The 4 of us stood there in the hallway for a moment. The house felt strangely quiet. Downstairs. Lily's voice drifted up from the living room, playing with her toys, completely unaware that her parents' marriage had just collapsed. Daniel looked toward the staircase, then back at me. "So what happens now?" he asked. The question sounded smaller than he probably intended. "Now?" I said. "Yes." I thought about it for a moment, then answered honestly. "Now you explain to your parents why you were sleeping with our nanny." Daniel flinched, because hearing the truth spoken out loud always feels worse. Richard shook his head again. "I can't believe this," he muttered. Then he looked at me. "Rachel, I'm sorry." And that was the moment Daniel understood something he had never considered. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about reputation, family, trust, and in one careless moment, he had destroyed all 3. The house felt different after that night. Not louder, not chaotic, just heavier. Like the walls themselves had heard everything and decided to remember it. Daniel barely spoke for the rest of the evening. His parents stayed another hour, not because anyone wanted to continue the dinner, but because none of us quite knew how to end it. Eventually, Richard stood up. "I think we should go." Linda hugged Lily goodbye. Then she looked at Daniel one last time. Not angry, just disappointed in a way that felt permanent. "We'll talk later," she said quietly. When the front door closed behind them, Daniel finally turned to me. "You planned this," he said. It wasn't an accusation anymore, just a statement. "Yes," I replied. Daniel stared at me, was still trying to understand how long the situation had been slipping out of his control. You invited them here on purpose. Yes. You wanted them to see it. Yes. Daniel laughed softly, but the sound carried no confidence now, only exhaustion. You could have just confronted me. I could have, but you didn't. No. Daniel ran a hand across his face, trying to gather his thoughts, trying to regain some version of control. So what happens now? I looked toward the living room where Lily was still playing, completely unaware that her parents' marriage had ended. Now, I said quietly, you move out. Daniel blinked. You're serious? Yes. You're throwing me out of my own house. Our house. He didn't argue, which surprised me. But I think in that moment he understood something important. There was no longer any version of this story where he was the victim. The next morning, Daniel packed a suitcase, not everything, just the essentials, clothes, laptop, a few personal things. Before leaving, he stood in Lily's doorway, watching her sleep. For a moment, he looked like the man I had married, the father who used to read bedtime stories, the person I thought I knew. But people aren't defined by who they are in quiet moments. They're defined by the choices they make when no one is watching. Daniel closed the door gently, then walked downstairs. Where will you go? I asked. He shrugged. Hotel for now. The irony of that answer didn't escape either of us. Before leaving, he paused at the front door. I made a mistake, he said. Yes. I never meant for things to get this far. But the truth about mistakes is simple. They don't usually begin with one decision. They begin with 100 small ones. Daniel had made all of them. The door closed behind him, and the house finally felt quiet again. The divorce process started a month later. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. Just paperwork. Lawyers, legal meetings. Emma never returned. Not to the house. Not to our lives. Apparently, she found another job in a different city, which was probably the smartest decision she could have made. As for Daniel, his relationship with his parents never fully recovered. Linda was polite. Richard was distant. The disappointment remained, and that was something Daniel couldn't fix with apologies. Sometimes people ask me if exposing him like that was revenge, if I did it to hurt him. The truth is simpler. I didn't ruin Daniel's reputation. I didn't destroy his relationship with his parents. I didn't create the moment that ended our marriage. I simply opened the door and let them see what he was doing. And sometimes, the truth is the most powerful consequence of all.